Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing CBSE 12th grade sociology guaranteed questions for the upcoming board exam. And this will include short answers, long answers, and MCQs. This video is part 1 of a series, so stay tuned for the rest. Let's start. Question number 1. Is westernization a reason for generational conflict? 2 marks. So, you know what westernization is, and you also have a vague idea what generational conflict is. But how can you connect these two? The textbook you might think only has 1 or 2 lines or just an assertion about the relationship between westernization and generational conflict. But how can you answer the question? Well, this is why you should read the boxes. This box 2.3 in chapter 2 of the Social Change and Development book contains the exact answer for this question with the case study as well. So the point of this video is not to give you 3 or 4 paragraphs that you can memorize for the exam. I'm giving you a format or a guidance which will help you frame your own answers and just give you an idea of what's required in the board answers to ensure maximum efficiency, accuracy, and coherence. So coming back to the answer, so the format is quite simple. It's a 2 marker, so you have to keep it within 60 words. And the first thing you'll do is you'll explain what westernization is because it's part of the question. In only 1 to 2 lines, just a brief definition, maybe one example if you have space or word limit. And then you might also give 1 line about generational conflict, just what it is. And then the second part, which a lot of people tend to miss, is answering yes or no. The question is, it's a yes or no question at its roots. It's asking, is westernization a reason for generational conflict? So you have to establish whether it's yes or no. Obviously, the answer is yes, so you'll write yes, it does lead to generational conflict. And then you'll start explaining why. So, introducing the concept, establishing whether it's yes, no, true, or false, and then giving a reasoning or explanation. And in this explanation, you'll add your keywords, which will add weight to your answer. So, Western cultural traits, globalization, acculturation, cultural homogenization, all these factors have increased the friction between the older generations and the present generation because there's a vast difference and distinction between their preferences, clothing style, food, music taste, and most importantly, their habits, prejudices, and worldviews. And so, to give more weight to your answer and make it practically perfect, you would refer to this box because it contains a lot of real world examples to this case study. And you can even quote the source directly. You can say that, according to a publication by Anima Datta, there's increase in middle class generational conflicts between the older generation and newer generation, especially in joint families, because, and you can quote this statement directly, and though they're of my own flesh and blood, they sometimes seem like strangers to me. I no longer have anything in common with them, neither their ways of thinking nor the way they dress up, talk, or behave. They're the new generation. So, yeah, quite simply, it's a guaranteed 2 marks because you've explained the westernization as a concept, you've established whether you agree with the statement or disagree, you've used your keywords efficiently, and you've also referred to a source, which provides a real life account. So moving on, what are Dr. Ambedkar's thoughts on protection of minorities? So you studied minorities, you study what protection of minorities means, but you don't know what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said because, as far as you know, it wasn't even in the textbook. Here, once again, this is where box has come into play. So box 6.6 in the chapter Challenges to Cultural Diversity states the exact answer to the question. So no further thought. You don't even have to introduce the concept as something different or you have to make any references. You can directly enter the answer by saying that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar voiced the following thoughts on the protection of minorities. And you can just add these 2 or 3 points. Usually in the marking scheme, they only add like best 2 points or any other valid points. So these two would be enough. His thoughts are that, first of all, minorities are like an explosive force which if erupts can blow up the entire fabric of the state. And two, minorities have agreed to place their existence in the hands of the minorities. And if you want to add even more weight to your answer, you can say, and as Redmond said to Carson in the context of the partition of Ireland, no minorities would choose safeguards, they would choose self-determination. And so the statement is made within reference to how Indian minorities are agreeing to place their existence in the hands of the state. They don't want to assert themselves as different or aspire to have autonomy or self-determination. They're agreeing to live peacefully in coexistence with the majority communities. Next question. What are the hardships faced by workers in hazardous industries, and what measures are being provided by the state for their betterment? So you might be thinking, I don't have to study this in particular, I can just wing the question on the exam day. See, that's a valid option, I'm not denying it, but instead of spending time on thinking of creative points, you can just use what's provided in the textbook. True, it's a general question, what are the hardships faced by workers in hazardous industries? But it'll save you time and it'll make your answers more efficient, and it'll be aligned with the marking scheme. So there's a higher chance of getting full marks. And so the answer is quite simple. Workers in mines and quarries and other hazardous industries face flooding, fire, collapse of roofs and sides, emission of toxic gases. They develop diseases like tuberculosis and silicosis, and they face several injuries. And then you can also include recent example to enrich your answer. So there's an example in the textbook given, but that's from 2006. So if you want to appear more updated and modern, then you would talk about how the Uttarakhand tunnel collapse occurred in November of 2023, and where 40 workers were trapped inside the tunnel for several weeks. And finally, coming to the government measures, because it's a two-part question, what are the hardships faced, and what measures are being provided by the state? So always remember, you should always answer both aspects of the question. Never leave anything because you didn't read it properly. Every question is divided into 2 or 3 parts, and you have to recognize these parts and answer them accordingly. Coming back to the government measures, there we have the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Condition Code of 2020, and this act provides administration which compels firms to record and report incidents and ensure adherence to safety standards, compliance to government regulations, and overall ensuring the safety and security of the worker. We also have the Administration Committee, which also can regulate these firms and ensure that they're complying to the government regulations and standards stipulated. And lastly, in certain cases, we can also see the government deploying the National Disaster Relief or Disaster Response Force, which occurred in the Uttarakhand tunnel collapse as well. So this question will probably be like 2 marks or a maximum 4 marks. So you can just add all these points and it'll be sufficient. Moving on. Question number 4. What is the Green Revolution and its social consequences? So I can give this to you in writing, basically. There's a guaranteed question on Green Revolution. It could be about the social consequences. It could be about the impact. It could be about the program itself and what it's led to. It can be about the economic consequences, but there will be a guaranteed question, whether it be MCQ, long answer, or short answer, on Green Revolution. And I can give this to you in writing. So, another important breakdown of the question. This is not a simple question. You have to explain what is the Green Revolution and its social consequences. So it's a 2-part question. Some people might forget to explain what the Green Revolution is, or their explanation might be too short. So it's better to explain both of these and break it down into 4 marks for the consequences and 2 marks for the Green Revolution explanation, or 5 marks for the consequences and 1 mark for the explanation. It's your call. So coming to the format, first you have to explain the Green Revolution. These are pretty standard basic points, so I would recommend to write these down and practice them. First of all, the Green Revolution is a series of technical reforms implemented by the government in the late 1960s to modernize Indian agriculture. It was largely funded by international organizations. It's based on increasing agricultural yield by utilizing high-yielding variety seeds or miracle seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, and other modern inputs. And is implemented in the wheat and rice growing areas in the first place, such as coastal Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Punjab, and it was later democratized across the rest of India in the second phase. So now coming to the social consequence, which is practically a guaranteed question, and most important topic in the entire chapter about uh, agricultural development. So the first consequence was increasing inequalities between the large farmers who were able to afford the inputs, pesticides, insecticides, high yielding variety of seeds, etc., and these small and marginal farmers who had no access to these. And so it's increasing their income inequalities. The rich farmers are getting richer because of greater yield and higher marketing capacity, and the poor farmers are growing poorer because they have they're dependent on these traditional primitive techniques of agriculture, which is not yielding them much. So next is displacement of the service caste. So the Green Revolution also included increasing mechanization of agriculture and usage of machinery. So this has led to a displacement of the service caste that work for the large and marginal farmers, large and medium farmers that is, because manual labor is being displaced, and you can also imply that this has led to circulation of labor, feminization of the workforce, whatever comes to your mind, because it's all about the connectivity at the end of the day. Third point, market-oriented cultivation spelled financial ruin. So many of the farmers switch from monocropping to single cropping, which means that they're dependent on the market. And also due to commercialization of agriculture, they're not cultivating sustenance crops like wheat and rice. They're moving towards commercial crops such as cotton, jute, fruits and vegetables, which are can be considered as either sustenance or commercial crops. But in general, you get the idea that they're moving towards commercialization and market-oriented cultivation. And so since they're only cultivating one crop, there's increased risk and liability of the farmer, because if there's a bad monsoon, or they're not able to afford the inputs, or there's an irrigation system failure or leakage, any of these consequences can have a significant effect on the farmer, because they're dependent on this one source of income, which is this one crop. And this lack of diversification is causing them to depend on the one crop and causing them to enter poverty or spell financial ruin, because there's less there's a higher risk and higher reward, but also the risk usually outweighs the reward. So fourth point, there's a worsening of regional inequality. So as I mentioned earlier, the first phase of the Green Revolution was only implemented in Punjab, Tamil Nadu, and coastal Andhra Pradesh, because these were the most agriculturally prosperous and developed. They already had strong irrigation systems with great connectivity, and they're also dominantly wheat and rice growing regions. So obviously there's an increase in regional disparities between the regions that implemented the Green Revolution and the regions that didn't implement because of their backwardness or because of the poor climate and lack of infrastructure. And this could lead to regional violence as well. Fifth point, there's an increase in caste-based violence. So this is in connectivity to the previous point about regional inequalities. So in some cases, it led to the enhancement or worsening of the feudal system and labor system, which led to caste-based violence in excess. And lastly, scientific farming. This is the base of Green Revolution, which is scientific, modern input-based farming. But this also leads to a loss of traditional knowledge of the farmers who have a connection with their land. They consider their land as their mother because it's their provider. But they're in the Green Revolution, it becomes more detached from the production process, because um, they just lose their attachment to the land itself, because usually their sowing and harvesting is dictated by certain techniques and application of certain methods. They lose their individuality and personal touch to the agriculture production process. And also there's an increase in health liabilities due to scientific farming because of the overuse of pesticides, fertilizers. They may cause a decline in the quality of the food, and also it's less labor intensive, so it causes unemployment in the agricultural areas or disguised unemployment. And also it pollutes the groundwater table because of the increased overusage in high doses of fertilizers and pesticides. Fifth question, what distinguished other backward classes, and how are their claims different from scheduled classes and scheduled tribes? Trace the steps taken by the government from their upliftment. So this question includes three parts. What's the difference between other backward classes and SCs and STs? The second part is, how are their claims different from SCs and STs? Which means, how is their voices, their opinions, and their movements different? And third part is to trace the steps taken by the government for their upliftment, educational backwardness. And the greatest distinction, and this point is indispensable when you're writing your answer, is that they're not forward castes, nor are they Dalits. So they're not on the upper end of the spectrum, but they're not casteless either. They're in between, and they're also suffering from certain degrees of marginalization and discrimination, which may not be to the extent of Dalits, but they don't have the social privileges and prestige as the upper caste either. So how are their claims different? So 1, there are large-scale disparities between the upper OBCs and lower OBCs. 2, there's internal differentiation as creamy layer and non-creamy layer. 3, there's no exact definition or even criterion for groups that may be classified as OBCs. 4, they demand reservation representation as well, but at a much larger proportion, because the SCs demand approximately 7% reservation, STs is 15%, and OBCs is a large 27%. But also because their proportion of the population is 41%, which is much larger. And coming to the government action, this has to be in a timeline format because it ensures maximum efficiency and accuracy. And it also ensures coherence because the dates and the actions of the government are not placed randomly across your answer. It's more systematic this way, so I recommend doing it like this. So in 1953, the first Backward Classes Commission was established, and this was also known as the Kaka Kalilkar Committee, submitted its report. But the government didn't actually implement the report and the recommendations of this committee. And you can also add a point about how from the period between 1953, so Nehru to Indira Gandhi, there was increasing loss of support of the Congress from the OBCs, other backward classes, especially in North India. The Congress was losing its vote bank and basis of support from these groups. And then in 1978, the Janata Party appointed the Second Backward Classes Commission, also known as the B.P. Mandal Commission. But it wasn't until the 1990s when the National Front government coalition led by V.P. Singh actually implemented the recommendation of the Mandal Commission, which stated that there should be 27% reservation for OBCs in political and educational institutions to ensure their representation and equity in parliament, politics, employment, and education. So, sixth question. The imperatives of development have governed attitudes towards tribes and shaped the policies of the state. In light of the given statement, explain the dichotomy between national development and tribal development. So as soon as you see this long question, you might be scared, apprehensive, and concerned about how you can answer it. You might not even understand the question. But this question is quite simple. Putting aside all these big words and statements and assertions, at its roots, it's simply asking to explain the dichotomy, which means the contrast between national development and tribal development. So coming to the answer, first we have to explain how national development took place from independence, and then we can also give a brief on how this is affecting the interests of tribals and their development, and the contrast or conflict between development of the country and development of the tribals, according to Nehru. And so this construction and development of infrastructure led to large-scale displacement and dispossession of tribals from their lands. And additionally, private property has also adversely affected tribals because their notion of ownership is based on community ownership. They don't advocate or even adopt the principles of private ownership. And lastly, the costs and benefits of this infrastructure, increase in national output, income, and benefits have disproportionately flown to different communities and resources, but haven't really materialized or been sent to the tribals. It hasn't led to their upliftment or their integration in society. Rather, it led to displacement, dispossession, and increasing in-migration of non-tribals in tribal areas, which creates strain on resources and overwhelms these tribal communities. Because their identity is being lost, there's a greater strain on resources, and there's less opportunities of employment. So to enrich your answer, you can also include stats such as the Sardar Sarovar Dam project has displaced 100,000 tribals, and in general, 500,000 tribals have been affected. So, that concludes part 1 of Sociology Grade 12 board exam guaranteed questions for the upcoming board exam. Thank you so much for watching. If you